Welcome into the Rockies Insider. I'm your Rockies Insider, Patrick Lyons, with the very first Rockies Insider podcast of Spring Training 2026. Colorado Rockies have begun, and we've got full squad workout here already. I mean, there are guys down right now in Scottsdale, position players doing their thing, despite the fact that it's only pitchers and catchers now. Guys get started earlier than ever. They're there. They want to get ready for the season. They want to put 2025 behind them. And that really feels like that is the biggest story right now for the Colorado Rockies, at least as an organization, right? There is this idea that even after the All-Star break, they were able to undergo a little bit of a reset. And Brenton Doyle referenced this over the weekend, saying, we felt like we were a much more complete team. They were 15-15 after the All-Star break that even included an 8-game losing streak, but they won 5 series. They split a 4-game set against the Los Angeles Dodgers, the reigning World Series champs, and then the eventual World Series champs. It's one series, but still for a team that at one point was on a pace to lose 135 games, that gave you a much better idea. At least they felt that was a much better indicator of how much talent that this roster had. And now, after a pretty successful offseason in renovating the front office, the roster as well, I'll break down exactly how many new players there are now on this team, veterans, big leaguers. Well, that is allowing everybody to feel a lot more refreshed. You probably even saw a clip out there of Warren Schaefer saying, this may be the last time I talk about 2025. I don't want to talk about it anymore. And you don't blame him. Felix, first one in. What's good? Good to see you. Good to see a Sunday evening live stream. Absolutely. Appreciate you guys dropping by. If you've got any questions, comments, concerns, drop them in the chat live as I record this late on Sunday night. Not too late, but happy President's Day weekend to everyone who celebrates. Hickster, how you doing? And to break things down on an individual player basis, and if you are just listening to this as a podcast, make sure you go over to the YouTube side of things so you can see the thumbnail, so you can get a glimpse of the man that has, I don't want to say captivated Rockies fandom right now, but has been the player that everyone has the most interest in. I think for each individual fan and each journalist, each media member, you might pick a different player that you're really looking at this spring to establish themselves or put themselves back up to a level or a status in which maybe they should have been, despite a rough 2025, that being Brenton Doyle, Ezekiel Tovar, Chase Dollander. But right now, at this point in spring, a lot of people are paying attention to Zac Veen. That's right. While the innocent Clown King, how you doing? But Zac Veen reported to camp early, like the rest of his teammates. And I'll pull back the curtain a little bit. There's a few of us in the media that do get clips from the Colorado Rockies with those that have the boots on the ground there for MLB.com, and they send out video of live BP, of guys throwing bullpen sessions, just taking regular batting practice, working out, one-on-one interviews, things of that nature. You can see a lot of that over on the Rockies Insider channel on YouTube. A lot more YouTube shorts. Make sure you go over and check that out. There's an entire channel that you can see, Spring Training 2026. And in one of those videos, just watching guys hit balls off a tee or just short toss, underhand tossing to guys. Immediately what jumped out was not Brenton Doyle's physicality, because we've known what it's been like. He still looks like $1 million. It wasn't Ezekiel Tovar with a fresh new haircut, looking good, looking ready, looking determined to put 2025 behind him and star potentially and win a gold medal with, hopefully, Team Venezuela in the World Baseball Classic. These are all things that you can almost read in these guys' body language, in the looks on their faces. But in the midst of seeing all of those guys, Cal Caros as well, showing up early, you couldn't not help but notice the body transformation, the reinvention of Zac Veen. Thomas Harding reporting from MLB.com in his conversation with Veen. He had ended last season at 202 pounds, which is a lot more than what some media outlets will report on what he weighs. Maybe he's more like 195, but big kid, not a lot of meat on the muscle. That's something that Ryan Feltner has been looking to do, as he's been one of the more skinnier, if you will. Very athletic, but not having perhaps the meat and the muscle on the bones that you would typically expect of a big league ball player. So Zac Veen ended last season at 202 and reported to camp at 245, 43 pounds heavier than he was at the end of last year, which a lot of guys can lose up to 20 pounds from the start of spring to the end. So that's not too crazy, but 43 pounds is probably double than what the average player. In the comments, Bruce Banner after he got angry. Yeah, he looks like the Incredible Hulk. He does in many ways. Some of it, I think, is good weight. Not all of it is good weight. You know, from the eye test, I would probably say 25% is probably muscle mass, and the other 75 not so much. Maybe it's more like 1/3 and 2/3. But still, a lot of that's going to come off even over the course of the next month. And one of the reasons, and perhaps Ellie, welcome to the Rockies Insider channel, is commenting, tell us a story. There's a reason why. Luke, welcome in. Good to see you, bud. But Zac Veen, the reason for the 43-pound increase in weight has a lot to do with the mental side of Zac Veen as part of his reinvention. Don't know a ton about his background growing up in Florida, but this is a young man that during his middle school years would get home from school and immediately jump on his bike to go play baseball. He was a baseball rat, loved it. His high school coach is a father figure to him in many ways, and still is in his camp. He went back to Spruce Creek High School and worked with Johnny Goodrich, his high school coach. And so got back to a lot of basics. But this is a young man who, as much as you want to say, yeah, he rode his bike 3 miles to get to the high school to hit in the batting cages and play with guys who were 4 or 5 years older than him in high school. There was a reason why he was leaving home at an early age. There was a reason why he was trying to escape something at home. And so those demons, unfortunately, is something that he's carried with him in pro ball. He said in this fantastic interview with Thomas Harding that, he was smoking marijuana and drinking just about every day. A real embarrassing, cringeworthy moment, as he described it, was after his first big league double. He's on second base, making a hand gesture that certainly wasn't family friendly and certainly wasn't a professional gesture that big leaguers do. What they do in their off time and what's allowed now by the new CBA, and it doesn't get you penalties, is what you do in your private time, but you don't perhaps glorify it in that same way. And you begin to look back and understand some of the coded message by Bud Black and the coaching staff saying, this young man might not be ready yet, despite almost 3 consecutive strong spring trainings in 23, 24, 25. He didn't break camp with the team. And some of that had to do with the roster. We're also learning a lot more now and realizing, I should say, that tons of opportunities were given to young players probably before they were ready. That's a lot of what this front office has been trying to do, is create more competition so that these young guys, when it's their time to play in the majors, it's because they're ready, not because there's really no other options in front of them. You want them to earn that spot. And that's not to say they haven't fully earned it, but you want guys to be banging down the door just a little bit versus, well, we just traded this guy and there's really, this person is the next man up. There's no better option. You want these players, as they're coming up through the minors, to say, I am the option. I am the guy that you need on your team. I am the guy that you want to build your franchise around. And potentially, when the Rockies become relevant, or at least become postseason contenders in 3, 4, 5 years from now, that young player is a part of that. But if it's more along the lines of, we don't really have any other options at the major league level, partially because we never went out to acquire veteran players and acquire better options, and just sort of sitting back on things, which is how Bill Schmidt operated during his tenure, then those young players are going to get those opportunities maybe when they're not really ready. Hickster saying looks like new front office. Still wants to give Veen a chance. Old front office didn't believe in Veen. To my point, it wasn't that they didn't believe in him. It was that they knew him very well and that there are things going on behind the scenes, off the field, that make it a little bit difficult for Zac Veen to be the best version of Zac Veen. You want to set these guys up for success, which is something that is hard to do when there's a lot of other young players on the roster. There's not veterans that you're learning the game from, how to play the game the right way. And I don't want to say that in any kind of stuffy way, because I think there's a lot of ways to play the game in the right way. And there's a lot of things you can do that might be a little bit flashier and might get some old school guys going, oh, you shouldn't be doing that. That's not playing the game the right way. In my definition, there's things that you need to do to get yourself ready for a ball game, both before, during, and after. And those are the kind of things that you need to learn from the veteran players. Any other kind of flash that you bring with you in personality, that's all fine. I'm good with all of that. I think most people are. But the belief in Zac Veen might have matched the belief Zac Veen had in himself. And so now 43 pounds heavier in a very good way for this 24-year-old young man. But now 43 pounds heavier and sober, perhaps now we see a much better version of Zac Veen, who, gosh, it's been 6 years. 6 years ago is when he was first drafted out of high school. And we're still yet to see what I think a lot of people were expecting out of Zac Veen. And maybe we're going to see that now. Maybe Zac Veen is finally being the best version of Zac Veen that, perhaps he was afraid of becoming. It's hard to say, but being sober now, alcohol-free, marijuana-free, I think that's going to lead to a much better version of Zac Veen on the field, whether that's in Albuquerque, whether that's in the big leagues. I think right now with 4 outfielders, Jordan Beck, Mickey Moniak, Jake McCarthy, Brenton Doyle, you can throw Tyler Freeman into that group as your number 5 starter. Sounds like he might play a little bit of second base. But if you're carrying 5 outfielders, Zac Veen is that next one. He's that next guy up on the 40-man roster with Yanquiel Fernandez gone. Sterling Thompson's there, sure. But all it takes is one injury for Zac Veen to be on this opening day roster, and he may now have that opportunity for himself. So that's a beautiful thing for Zac Veen and for this organization. So many guys with the nutrition, it can be so difficult where it can get away from you. Brenton Doyle said it a couple years ago after his first big league season that he needs to snack more during the game, and not snack on potato chips, but get more nutrition in the middle of the game because of the amount of calories that you burn. We think of baseball as being sort of a slow, meandering sport, but the metabolism gets moving on these guys. For Brenton Doyle, running out to center field back and forth 9 times, that's a lot of mileage right there. So eating well is a huge thing. And if you lose sight of that, which is something that, Veen did talk about, again, great article, highly recommend you check it out, from Thomas Harding over on MLB.com or Rockies.com, where, his meal was marijuana. Like it wasn't necessarily that he was eating, that satiated him, I think, to a degree. So the diet was really lacking. And now it's clearly much better. And Warren Schaefer said that Zac Veen is like a friend to him. Excuse me, not a friend, like a son to him, right? And that's critical to have somebody like a Warren Schaefer, the manager of the team, to be in your corner, to give you that opportunity, to believe in you. And so, Warren Schaefer cares more about Zac Veen, the person, than the prospect, which is part of what makes Warren Schaefer, I think, so great for this job and such a good fit for the Colorado Rockies right now during this transition. So he's going to get those opportunities, and I think it's going to pay off for him that much more. I really think so. Luke in the chat, would you say Ritter's AAA performance in 2025 earned his spot on the MLB squad? No, not exactly, because there are other players who performed fairly well last year, and Baseball and all professional sports is a lot much more of a what have you done for me lately sport. And so I've talked about this in the past couple of weeks on the Rockies Insider podcast that with Willie Castro and his ability to play second, short, and third base, now you've got Ryan Ritter, Adiel Amador, Tyler Freeman, to a lesser degree, Kyle Karros over at third base. All of those guys are essentially battling for maybe one of the final spots in the infield on the bench. I think the Rockies are going to be doing a lot of platooning this year. And so Karros is sitting from the right-hand side, Freeman, Ryan Ritter. And if you're only going to carry one of those guys, because Willie Castro can play second base, Karros is at third, or Castro is at third base, and Ryan Ritter's at second base. It's what have you done for me lately? And so spring is going to be, a big part right now of what's going to happen on the opening day roster, which is something I will very much address. Ritter, better than Amador. Right now, it does feel that way, but Adiel Amador, with this new coaching staff, with the new front office, perhaps we see that tweak and he can elevate himself to become the big leaguer a lot of people were hoping he would be. Look at his numbers in the final month with the AAA Albuquerque Isotopes. Yes, it's a hitter's haven, no doubt about it. But numbers that he was able to put up suggest there's a lot more left to like about Adiel Amador, and he's not done yet. He's not being defined by what you saw in 2024 when he wasn't quite ready yet, and it was really just a matter of Brendan Rodgers getting hurt again, and they needed somebody at second base. And in 2025, when he was learning the ropes for the very first time. We also got to hear on Sunday from Chase Dollander, who's been excited to pick the brains of the three new starting pitchers so far. Lorenzen has been his guy. That's probably has to do with the fact that he's been on the Rockies a lot longer, more than a week now at this point. So he's been around. They were together at Rockies Fest. That's been his go-to guy. And yeah, that does mean that there's a chance that Chase Dollander is now fighting for a spot in the rotation as the number 5 starter. And he doesn't feel like this is pressure. And not in any kind of, wow, he's got this determined attitude. No, it's how like a lot of big leaguers think, but I don't know if all of them believe it. Chase Dollander truly does believe that there's not pressure on him. And that's the kind of mindset this young man has that's so promising for him. He said, quote, pressure is a privilege. Other people have real pressure. Like regular folks like you out there, you've got real pressure on you. He doesn't have it. Either he's going to go to AAA and pitch and continue his baseball career, or he's going to be in that starting rotation. And as good as it is and as deep as it has now become, all it takes is an injury or two. And Chase Dollander is in the starting rotation. It's as simple as that. Dollander loving the new pitching coaches, talking with these guys, getting new ideas. That's been the biggest thing that is such a change and refreshing for the Rockies team is the organization as a whole had been stale for a very long time. After the pandemic and after Jeff Bridich left, the Rockies rested on their laurels throughout and became very complacent. And it started at the top with it started at the top from primary owner Dick Monfort. It started there. And that's not to say people weren't working as hard as they could, no. But when you only have so many resources, you can only do so much. And you can't really swim upstream, swim against the current to try to learn analytics completely on your own and fight for certain equipment to be down at spring training. Now, the Rockies do have the lab down at Salt River Fields, but it took a while. It took far too long for them to get that. Let's go Avs, Amador and Fernandez, MLB The Show legends. Yes, Yankiel Fernandez, is he still in DFA limbo? He might have slid through waivers by the Yankees now at this point. Jim Kay saying, being realistic but excited about the Rockies. Looking forward to seeing what some of these new Rockies and some of the young guys and guys like Doyle, Dollander, Moniak, etc. can do. It's still a very young team, one of the youngest in the game. Conversely, and this is going to be a very bad example, but hear me out just a little bit. And I'm not blowing smoke. Just looking at the numbers, the Dodgers are one of the oldest teams in the game. I think they were the oldest in baseball in 2025. So they can't really do much more. Now, even if they did what they did last year, or were even a little bit worse, they're still winning a World Series. in 2026, right? The first three-peat since we saw the Yankees do it from 98 to 2000. But the Rockies have a lot of room to grow. And that's why there's some prognosticators out there that may not think the Rockies are a lock for 100 losses. I think I'm still on the 100 plus loss train, but it's going to look a lot better in 2026 than it did last year. No doubt about it. Thoughts or any news on Charlie Condon? Does he have any chance at the first base spot? I did just write about this for justbaseball.com. You can check that article out. It basically covers all of the first base options. You know, are they done? Are they going to add another first baseman? You know, right before I went live here on the Rockies Insider channel on YouTube, I wanted to make sure that I had my phone with me in case there were any alerts, because that's how the past month has been. That's how it's felt for the Rockies, where they continue to make transaction after transaction or adding somebody new to the front office. It's been very refreshing. It's been a good thing. It's not stressful. It's positive. It's exciting. Very exciting. Staying up much later than I would like some nights, writing articles, doing deep dives, things of that nature. But check that article out at justbaseball.com about the options at first base, because right now there's three on the roster. It's Troy Johnston, it's Blaine Crim, who looked strong last year in a very, very small sample size, but looked strong last year. And then you also have being able to play first base is Edward Julian, who is going to get a lot of time over at second base as well. So those are the three incumbents. There's TJ Rumfield, who came over in their Angel Chivigi trade from the Yankees, who has really good numbers. He's not on the 40-man roster, so it's gonna take a little bit for him to work his way there. And then there's Charlie Condon. So Condon right now is number 5 on the depth chart, and he could be number 6 if the Rockies then go out and acquire another first baseman, whether it's a Christian Walker or Isaac Paredes from the Houston Astros, maybe Drake Cronenworth from the Padres if the Pods want to free up a little bit of cash now that they've got Nick Castellanos, who will play a little bit of first base, and who I thought perhaps the Rockies could acquire. You trade Antonio Senzatela, money for money. You also get a prospect from the Phillies. Maybe that works out, even though Nick Castellanos has never played first base as a professional, like not even in the minors did he play first base, but he was a third baseman. Keep that in mind. You don't go from the outfield to first base. I've heard people suggest maybe Zac Veen's going to be playing some first base. He's not. First, outfielders do not play first base. Bryce Harper is the lone exception. That's what has made what he's done so remarkable. But Nick Castellanos, who has been on the dirt before as a third baseman, the first part of his career, I think that transition won't be as hard, and he'll play for some first base with the Padres now that he's signed there. But if they go out and acquire one of those players in a trade, or even acquire someone like a Rhys Hoskins, who I think is probably the only option out there that provides a significant upgrade over what they currently have or what they could currently piece together, that's going to put Charlie Condon 6th on that depth chart. But as I said earlier, all it takes is Charlie Condon to rake in the Eastern League, where I think he's going to start this season. Could be a very short stay in Hartford. Goes to AAA Albuquerque, and if he's banging on the door, then in June, Rhys Hoskins and whoever else is playing first base can get traded to a contender, and then first base is Charlie Condon's. So he's gonna have to earn that spot. He's not on the 40-man roster, so you got to make a couple moves to get that to work. So Condon, look, he's fighting for a spot this season, but is it reasonable to say that he is going to make the opening day roster? I don't think so. He would have to have made a lot of adjustments this offseason to get to that spot. That's not to say he won't get there by the summer. I think he very well could, but there's a difference between making those adjustments and having that early success in AA and AAA, and then coming up to the majors. There's a big difference between that and boom, ready from the jump from the first game on Friday, February 20th against the Arizona Diamondbacks, which is this Friday. Get pumped for it, and making the opening day roster when there's already some decent options there. So I think that's going to be hard to do. Love these comments, guys. Rockies versus USA on March 3rd. That will be Rockies TV. And they're going to have a crew there, Drew Goodman, Jeff Houston, those guys. They'll be there broadcasting it. There's only one other game actually that Rockies TV is doing, which is kind of disappointing. You're going to get the KOA feed for some of it. You're going to get the opposing team, the visiting team or the home team, whatever. But the opposing team, their broadcast. So it might not be very Rockies centric, and they're going to use the cameras in the stadium. So it's not going to be the typical Rockies TV, formerly AT&T Sportsnet crew there that produces a game. It's going to be, hey, here's what we've got. Here's something. Enjoy it. The Rockies Insider with me, Patrick Lyons, your Rockies Insider, discussing so many of the early stories here in spring training camp. And Zac Veen, as we know, has been that big story in the early going, or at least the one that has gotten the most attention. But I think Antonio Senzatela is a really interesting one, particularly for a deep starting rotation and for a guy who's in the final year of a 5-year, $50.5 million contract. He's going to make $14 million this season. There's a $14 million club option for next year, but I don't see there being any amount of success that Senzatela has this year that would make the Rockies want to sign up for another year of that. And he'd have to have a career season, which is not impossible. But, Senzatela, he's going to pitch for Team Venezuela in the World Baseball Classic. That's going to be of certain benefit to him. Let's not forget that since 2022, when his season ended up abruptly, I think it was an ACL. He tore a ligament in his left knee in a start in St. Louis. And that was his first year of the 5-year deal. They didn't have to give him that extension. He had 2 more years of team control, and he would have been a free agent after 2023. But Bill Schmidt had some money to burn. That was $182 million to Kris Bryant. Kyle Freeland got paid. Ryan McMahon got paid. There were other extensions there. But at the end of that first year of the extension, tears the knee ligament, and that throws him off just a little bit in his throwing motions and needs Tommy John right there early on in 2023. And then he returns back in 2025 and has a 6.65 ERA, was 4-15 over 30 games. In fact, was moved to the bullpen. And Warren Schaefer said, yeah, no, he's going to the bullpen for next year, when I honestly didn't believe that, because there weren't a ton of options that were ahead of him on the depth chart. In fact, none that were definitively better than Antonio Senzatela when he's best. If you're fed up with him in 2025, that's fine. But in 2026, after an offseason, after being able to work on a few things, Antonio Senzatela may be one of your better options. Now, of course, President of Baseball Operations, Paul DePodesta, who was not in charge when Warren Schaefer made those statements, has brought in 3 veteran starters in Michael Lorenzen, Tomoyuki Sugano, and Jose Quintana. So now all of a sudden, Senzatela is your number 5 starter over Chase Dollander. I don't know, but the early going, working with this new pitching staff, there's some new pitch grips that Senzatela is working with. He's had a very 4-seam heavy diet, for hitters, and it worked fairly well in 2017 and 2018. And since then, not so much. He's had actually one of the worst 4-seam run values in the majors. So it's not been an effective pitch. So more off-speed pitches, perhaps under the guise of, or under the tutelage of this new coaching staff, these pitching coaches, maybe that changed things just a little bit. Maybe he's in the mix for the rotation. Maybe you're able to deal him to a team that is really hard up for some starting pitching depth, and you eat $11 million of his contract, and you free up a spot on the 40-man roster. You free up a spot on the active 26-man roster, and you even bring something back, and you save $3 million on top of it. So you're going to hear the Rockies saying a lot of nice things about Antonio Senzatela, when I think there's a lot of Rockies fans right now saying, not again, please, not again. But a new year, a refresh is good for everybody, is good for everyone. While the innocent saying, how does Herman fit in with the Padres? Yeah, that was an interesting piece of news that came out on Saturday, stopped me in my tracks. Not that he wasn't returning to the Rockies. That was pretty much well known, way before the end of last season, that I think Marquez wanted to go out there and try something different. A new place a new change of scenery is always good for players. And I think the Rockies were ready to move on as well. Even before the new front office took over, it was just time to move on from German Marquez. And I think it's going to be a win-win for both the Rockies and German. But the Padres, they bring back Michael King. Joe Musgrove is back. Randy Vasquez looked, pretty good in moments last year. There's Kyle Hart. They also signed Griffin Canning to a 1-year deal. So despite getting a big league deal, German Marquez might not be a surefire number 5 starter for the Padres. There is definitely a collection of starting pitchers for the Padres, and really there's only 3 that you would probably look at and say, hey, no, this guy deserves a spot in the rotation. The rest are going to need to battle. There are definite questions, as Yu Darvish is gone for all of 2026. So it's going to be interesting to see how Marquez does fit in. Is he just another body, another arm for the Padres to utilize as they continue to go forth with a somewhat of a stars and scrubs type roster? They've got tons of guys making 150, 200, 300 million dollar contracts. And then the rest of the players, some of them are homegrown, but they don't have too many because they've traded all of them away over the past few years. And guys they've signed to 1-year deals, not making a lot of money because so many other players are making a ton of money. As I mentioned, with the new front office in place, the new pitching coaches, the mentality is very different. Luke pointing out Michael Lorenzen and the fact that he's been wanting to come to Coors Field for a while. His agent hasn't wanted him to come to Coors Field because that's going to tank his value. But this year felt like it was the right time. Still getting $8 million from the Rockies and, jump into the lab. And I've seen the conversations on the video that I've been privy to of Lorenzen and Alon Leishman having conversations about, hey, no, I should do this, or what did you notice on that pitch? And I was surprised to have gotten that result. And so it's been intense, but positively intense conversations, between Lorenzen and the coaching staff. And I imagine it's going to be the case between Lorenzen and a lot of the other young pitchers. That's part of his value that he brings, which is incredibly exciting to see that. So, Lorenzen brings a flair that's going to benefit absolutely everybody in the rotation and in the organization. Because he said it before, and you could see these videos over on the Rockies Insider channel on YouTube, that there's a lot of untapped potential in Colorado. Now, when he says that, I think he is actually referring to Coors Field, pitching at altitude, Denver, the organization as a whole versus looking at the roster itself. Now, he probably means that as well, because you look at any big league roster, even amongst the worst teams in the league, you can still look and go, there's potential there. I see a couple changes. I see a couple tweaks, and someone is going to start to have a lot more success. And someone who's already having success could go out and immediately become dominant. But I think what Lorenzen is really getting at by saying there's a lot of untapped potential in Colorado is just that there's still a lot that we don't know about what it means to be successful in Denver at Coors Field, at that ballpark in particular. And I think he can learn some things. I don't think solving Coors Field is as simple as do this one thing, and now all of a sudden you can go out there and the right arm in the right season is going to be a perennial Cy Young candidate. No, I think it's going to be a lot of different things, but Michael Lorenzen is going to help to try to figure out a couple things to add to the Rolodex of how a pitcher can be successful at Coors Field. That's pretty huge. That's a huge thing that the Rockies really need. Some other spring notes worth pointing out. Kris Bryant, don't expect to see him around very much. His back still in a bad condition. He's going in for a physical. I'm not even sure if he's had that yet, but as soon as that's done, he's going to go back home to Las Vegas. He's going to do most of his rehab work there. So not going to be a presence at spring training or contributing off the field if you will. Not sure what he could do necessarily. Not sure if the Rockies even want him around at this point as part of the refresh, right? Because Kris Bryant certainly is a vestige of the previous front office. He's a vestigial tail that, as the Rockies evolve, they don't need that tail anymore, right? They're trying to get away from that. And so hiding the reminders of one of the big mistakes that this team has made, that Dick Monfort made, is going to benefit the team. New manager, a new front office, a lot of new people in power. That's letting you know, hey, we're doing things differently here. Don't be reminded of 3 consecutive 100-loss seasons or 119 losses in just last year alone. It's different. And I think, not keeping Kris Bryant around contributes to that. His absence is beneficial, I think, to the entire clubhouse. Bryant has, had a few visits with Rockies athletic trainer Keith Duggar, but they know that he's not ready to go, and so that's one of the reasons why when Tomoyuki Sagano was signed, Bryant went to the 60-day IL, because he's not going to be ready for the first 57 games of the season. Remember, the 60-day IL is days, not games, and so there's 3 off days in there, including opening day, which unfortunately the Rockies don't play in. Another little fun fact too, I don't think I mentioned this on the pod. The Rockies, let me start it phrasing it in a different way. The Athletics are playing in Sacramento for 3 years. And the only team that will not play the Athletics in Sacramento will be the Colorado Rockies. Take that for what it's worth. 2025, the first year of Sacramento, the A's came to Colorado. Same is going to be true in next year in 2027, A's in Colorado. So the only time in this 3 years, if they really are able to start in Las Vegas, the Las Vegas Athletics, if they're able to get going in 2028, the only chance that the Rockies have to play the A's in Sacramento is this year. And they're not going to do it. They're going to play 3 games at the AAA stadium in Las Vegas as somewhat of a primer to get that fan base a little bit excited. So for what it's worth, right? The Rockies don't have a game on opening day for the 2nd straight year, and they're going to be the only team in baseball to not play the A's in Sacramento. Just is what it is. In the chat over on YouTube, as pressed, you get to see some video that's not made publicly available. Yes, that is correct. The Rockies do a wonderful job of filming the workouts. They send it to a select choice of media members to do with what they please, and it's great getting to see some of the interviews. A little bit more detail that goes into a lot of the articles that Thomas Harding writes, because he works for MLB.com. The Rockies are in MLB, so you get to see those interviews and what those conversations look like. Not all of it. Some of it's behind the scenes, but certainly a lot of really great video and interviews that the Rockies share out. The Rockies communication department is easily one of the best in all of baseball. Say what you will about the Rockies and their win-loss record, but there's a lot that they do well. There's a lot that Dick Monfort does well as a businessman. There's a lot of areas in the front office on the business side of things that are great. And the Rockies communication department is a number one in terms of that. So they always hire great people, work hard, intelligent. They're always there with an answer. I couldn't say enough great things about everybody on the Rockies communications department. Also, any plans to go to Salt River this spring? Yeah, usually I'm there right now. My favorite time of year to cover baseball in spring training is actually before the games, because to me, the games are a bit of noise that's unnecessary because we know the results don't matter. It's fun to see a guy hit a homer or steal a base hit, whatever it may be. Pitcher go out, 2 scoreless innings. Cool. The results really aren't that important, right? So the games are somewhat of a distraction. And so before the games start, and that's really when all the news is breaking. Who's healthy? Who's hurt? Who's banged up a little bit? Who are going to be the guys that get an opportunity that maybe you didn't realize was going to get that opportunity? I usually like to go down early before the games start, right when the guys first start to report. That's my favorite time, but I decided this year I want to try things a little bit differently, see what it's like going later in the spring. So I've got a few days coming up in about a month from now, towards the middle of March. I'm going to head down there for a few days down in Scottsdale, see a few games, talk with players, and really wrap my head around what this roster is going to look like, what it could look like. Which players are going to be critical this season, and I think fans are going to have a lot more of a fascination with. And getting to see them play a little bit, getting to see some of these interviews, and having the conversations that I do with other media members and Rockies fans, and even the comments that I see here, or people that go over on the Rockies Insider channel on YouTube to ask a question, or they're in the DMs on social media, whatever it may be. It gets my brain working in different ways that, I don't necessarily get the opportunity to at the beginning of spring training. So there's many a times in which, I go down there, have my interviews with as many players as I would like, have my fill. And then when I get home, I think, ooh, I wish I would have asked that. I wish I would have realized that. And now I'll have that opportunity to do that. So I wanted to try something different. So yes, I will be down there in the middle of March, checking out some of the games. Speaking of, hey, what guys early on are banged up in Rockies camp? The only one right now, as of recording, is Tyler Freeman. He has a bit of a back issue to start camp, but it is not serious, at least not yet. I think the Rockies still have somewhat big plans for him as a second base corner outfield type. They've got 4 really everyday outfielders in many ways. I think they're going to deploy them depending on the left-right matchup of the starting pitcher. So a lot of it is going to have to do with that. But I think Freeman, if he can at least be a serviceable second baseman, doesn't even have to be league average, but if he can be a serviceable second baseman, he has a much better shot at contributing to this team going forward. And still has a few more years of team control. Doesn't have a ton of pop in his bat, but if he can be a guy that makes a lot of contact and can get on base, steal a bag here and there, second base is a much better fit for him because you need power coming out of the corners in the outfield. That's the huge piece right now for the Rockies and for Tyler Freeman. And Freeman, look, right now, and knock on wood, but the injuries are starting to mount in Major League Baseball. You've probably already seen it. There's been a hamate contagion, however you want to phrase it, but a lot of guys with the hamate bone in their hand. You swing hard, you make contact, the knob of the bat's going in your hand, and it breaks. And it's not a huge injury. You get it removed, but it does sap your power. And for a lot of these smaller guys that this has happened to, it remains to be seen, how much pop we're going to see out of Francisco Lindor, who very well may start the season on the IL with this hamate injury. Although with Lindor, I mean, he's a grinder. I wouldn't bet. I would guess that both Jackson Holliday and Corbin Carroll are going to sit out for a little while to the start of the season. But Francisco Lindor, he's going to find a way to get himself back on the field. The hamate bone break there is not critical. I can remember, I think it was 2019, perhaps, when, I don't know if it was 2019 or 2020. I think it was 2019, when Josh Fuentes broke his hamate bone, and that sidelined him and for the first part of the year. But it wasn't really that long. He was able to bounce back. He didn't really miss very many games. So he's probably been the last one for the Rockies, I think, that has had that happen to him. So Corbin Carroll, Jackson Holliday, Francisco Lindor to the IL. Corbin Carroll now needs to be replaced on Team USA. Good thing Puerto Rico already knew they had to move on from Francisco Lindor with him not getting insurance coverage, despite the fact that Bad Bunny went out there and was trying to cover all kinds of Puerto Rican players, saying, hey, I'll cover that insurance. If insurance doesn't do it, I'll do it. He runs his own sports company, Remus Sports. So he himself is not an agent. In fact, this was something that I didn't mention at all last week or post about, but in many ways, you can say Ezequiel Tovar, who is a client of Remus Sports, which is owned by Bad Bunny, that Ezequiel Tovar's boss is performing the halftime show at the Super Bowl, which is pretty interesting. Spencer Schwellenbach of Atlanta, elbow inflammation. He's going to be gone for a while. Josh Hader, we'll wait and see what happens with him. The closer of the Astros, bicep inflammation. Anthony Santander just had surgery, so he's going to be gone 5 to 6 months. Not clear why that didn't happen any earlier. Shane Bieber, forearm fatigue with the Blue Jays, who have also lost Bowden Francis to Tommy John surgery. Detroit has lost Reese Olson for the entirety of the season after shoulder surgery. Zach Wheeler is actually recovering nicely from thoracic outlet syndrome, although he does have a rib in a jar now, which is interesting to say the least. When Framber Valdez got signed about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, I told you that was going to speed up the process of a lot of other starting pitchers signing, falling in place. We saw Zach Gallen return to the Arizona Diamondbacks on a deal that is going to pay him essentially less than what he would have gotten had he accepted the qualifying offer from the Arizona Diamondbacks. Justin Verlander back to the Tigers. Chris Bassett to the Orioles on a 1-year, $18.5 million deal. And there's still, some other guys out there that, again, may get signed by the time you hear this, but Lucas Giolito, Zach Littell, and Max Scherzer are all dangling about there. I don't think the Rockies are going to add another starting pitcher. Not sure how necessary it will be for them to do so, but there's still some top 50 free agents that are out there. In the chat, Anthony saying people may not be expecting a World Series from the Rockies this year, but they're still going to be one of the most exciting teams to watch due to all the changes they've made, in my opinion. Let's go Rockies. Yeah, I think I've said this before, and if you've listened to me on the Rockies Insider or when I worked for DNVR Rockies, is that the 2023 season was the first year that the Rockies lost 100 games. And yet it was light years more exciting than the 2022 campaign, where they didn't lose 100 games. They weren't even close. But the reason why they were so exciting was because there was a changing of the guard. You had Nolan Jones and Brenton Doyle, the two Colorado Cannons out there, which now I think we have to just start calling Brenton Doyle the Colorado Cannon. He's by himself now. But you had those two guys coming up. You had Ezekiel Tovar's first full season. And it just felt like, okay, all right, there are some guys here now. And we know what happened in the 2 years after that. But it did feel like there was some positive change that was starting. And I think, as you point out, Anthony, that we're going to start to see some changes. And it might still be another 100 loss season, but it's a change. And I think a lot of Rockies fans will understand that. There'll be plenty of people who dunk on the Rockies for losing 100 games. If they do again, even if it's closer to 110, whatever it may be, they'll dunk on them. But Dick Monfort and Walker Monfort did the big thing. They were able to go out, change this front office, get some of the best pitching minds that were available to come in to coach and invest in this roster, invest in the coaching staff as well. Increase the number of front office members. Those are changes that don't immediately make you better, but are going to make you better going forward. And that's why the win-loss record this year really doesn't matter too much. I think you're right. They're going to be a bit more exciting. There's not going to be those 8-game losing streaks where you feel like, you know what? I haven't paid attention to the Rockies in a week because they haven't won in a week. They haven't won in more than a week because there were 2 days off in between somewhere. So I don't think that's going to happen quite as much. And there's not going to be those same lulls. And it is going to be a little bit more exciting this year. We got a way to go. We got a way to go until, we really see the Rockies take their full form. But this year is the start of that, of laying the groundwork. And the front office has done that really well so far. Anthony, any relation? Any relation? I'm looking forward to talking with Michael again once I'm down there in spring training. I talked with him, I think it was 2019 when he first started his transition over to being a two-way player with the Reds. I was fascinated by that. So there's an article you can check out that I wrote a few years ago talking about that. So maybe he'll get an at-bat. Who's going to get more at-bats this season? Michael Lorenzen or Kris Bryant? Is that some good water cooler conversation for tomorrow? You're off tomorrow, and you also noticed the Philly part of my accent by when I say water. The Rockies Insider with me, Patrick Lyons. Welcome in, discussing this Rockies team that This is the time of year in spring training before the games, and even during the games, at least a little bit. You can look past the win-loss record. You can look past some of the performances of the players. But even more so before the games start, which days away, Friday, February 20th, days away. Even before that, though, there's hype for every team. And there's plenty of good news coming out of camp down at Salt River Fields. There's plenty of buzz, plenty of hype. It's more buzz than hype, but it's an exciting time. And the fact that there are some projections out there that have changed because of the signings of Tomoyuki Sagano and Jose Quintana, who these are not all-star pitchers anymore at this point in their careers, but the upgrade from what they currently had as their number 4 or 5 starter, young pitchers who maybe aren't ready, who still need to do more developing, who are not quite, league average talents yet. They're young, but they're not quite league average talents. To go from a AAA pitcher who's maybe not quite yet ready to a veteran big leaguer who is at least going to be league average, that's worth a couple extra wins. And so you might be surprised here in just a moment when I tell you what some of those projections are from Baseball America and from Fangraphs. This is these are somewhat eye-popping after seeing 100 plus losses the last 3 years. But Friday is the start of spring training, the Cactus League slate, and they don't always go with a young pitcher to start the game to get the honors, because I think it was 2023, maybe Ty Block, and then you had Carson Palmquist, Bradley Blaylock, I believe, over the last 2 years. I think we could see Gabriel Hughes getting that honor, because I think he is that next starting pitcher that has potential to make an impact in the rotation. We know about Chase Dollander already, but Gabriel Hughes, I think, is going to be that next guy. I like what he could potentially do in this rotation over the next couple of years, more so than, the likes of a Sean Sullivan. JB Middleton, who's still yet to make his professional debut, was one of their early picks last year's draft. But that game on Friday is going to be on radio, on TV. There are 12 televised games for Rockies TV. It's only 2 with the typical crew. It's the USA game that they play as USA gets ready for the World Baseball Classic. And I believe it's one of their last games in Florida. I think they're playing Detroit and Lakeland. I think that might be the only other game. You're going to get KOA radio calling 7 games, and then 3 games will use the opposing team's audio. I've talked a lot recently about Brenton Doyle benefiting the most from a fresh start. This entire team is going to benefit from a fresh start. For Doyle, he had a left quadricep injury early on in the year, and then later on in the month, a personal tragedy, which he and his wife, his family, had a miscarriage, and that was something that I think a lot of people plugged into the Rockies world was aware of, but it wasn't something that was talked about a ton, in regards to how difficult that could be for any human beings, particularly someone like a Brenton Doyle, who needs to be out there in front of cameras each and every day performing. And there are numbers. You're being evaluated every single day. And meanwhile, you've got a family that needs to go on, and you unfortunately maybe aren't able to be there with them as much as you would obviously like. He said in an interview with Thomas Harding on Rockies.com, quote, "I regret how quickly I rushed back into the season. Maybe I should have taken more time with my wife to be there for her and my family. She's super extroverted, the complete opposite of me, but opposites attract. She's my rock. She is a rock star." And that, when I read that choked me up right there, to know what kind of a man Brenton Doyle is and how he has learned from that situation, how he and his family now have this refresh. And it really suggests that despite this tragedy for him and his family, that he and his wife have, perhaps worked through that, because that's going to be hard in the healthiest of relationships. I've never had to deal with anything like that in my own personal marriage, so I can't imagine what that's like. And no one out there should judge Brenton Doyle for what he did, or his family, anything like that. And I don't think anyone is, but that gives you an idea about what was going on Zac Veen had his own off-field issues. How much of that was him making that? But Brenton Doyle, you wake up one day and that's the world that you live in. He did nothing to contribute to that. Neither did his wife, neither did his family. And yet that is an off the field tragedy that impacts Brenton Doyle each and every day. Now, a fresh start is something that I think could be really beneficial for him, because he was a player that was about to take that next step into stardom. Maybe not superstardom, but hey, he's an all-star that people are well aware of. They should already be if they're a baseball fan, because you win the Gold Glove Award your first 2 seasons. And it was great. You can see this clip over on the Rockies Insider channel on YouTube, at Patrick D. Lyons on X. I posted the clip of Warren Schaefer kind of laughing, saying, give him a break that he didn't win a Gold Glove Award last year. And you know what? I think he probably could have been a finalist. It did feel in some ways that perhaps, Brenton Doyle wasn't the same in 2025 as 2024. He said that he, based on the eye test, he was just as good, if not better. And for me, the eye test, it was skewed. I didn't think he was better, but there's a reason for that. I could only go by certain literal things that my eyes saw. What I didn't see was a lot of outfield assists from Brenton Doyle. But once again, that's not his fault. He had only 6 outfield assists, but that had everything to do with teams not even thinking about running. I can't tell you how many times there was a fly ball that wasn't quite deep, certainly wasn't shallow, hit out to Brenton Doyle, and a runner on second base or third base didn't even bother to pretend that they were going to tag up because the Colorado Cannon was there. So he didn't get the same amount of opportunities to rack up certain numbers or metrics that would have helped him out like he did in 2024 when he had 8 outfield assists, or in 2023 when he had 10 outfield assists. Teams simply didn't challenge him at all. And that shows up in the metrics, and that hurt him unfairly. But I think with a much more normal season from him in 2026, we're going to see a 3rd Gold Glove Award from Brenton Doyle. And then at that point, it's only Larry Walker who has more Gold Glove Awards by an outfielder in Rockies history. I think Doyle is also, very highly aware about the fact that he had extreme home road splits last year, only hit 162 on the road with a 209 on base, 251 slug. That's really bad. But a lot of Rockies were really bad on the road last year. They simply didn't help each other out. It just compounded and got worse. But at home, you saw a guy who hit 301 with a 341 on base and a 502 slugging percentage. I gypped him 5 points on his batting average. He hit 306. 306, 341, 502 slug. There are going to be splits, no doubt about it. But I think Brenton Doyle is going to be a much better player on the road. And I also want to say something else complimentary about Brenton Doyle. He posted on Instagram about getting his number retired at his high school back in Virginia. And Brenton Doyle's a pretty good writer. I don't know if he journals. I don't know if he's a big reader. Could he see himself writing, an autobiography, something like that at some point? Maybe. That's one of those questions I'll get to ask him next month. But Brenton Doyle, really good to see him getting a fresh start, looking refreshed, and knowing that all of 2025 is in the rear view. The Rockies put it in their rear view during the All-Star break. They had, a big meeting, and they went 15-15 out of the break, winning those 5 series, splitting with the Dodgers, and they looked a lot more like a decent baseball team. I'll say that. In the chat, Patrick, do you know what they are doing to try and help fix the course hangover bad home road splits? Look, that is just going to always exist to varying degrees, but something that Charlie Blackmon has, or he did institute. Again, a player forcing the team to do this suggests that the team itself, the coaching staff, the front office, is not innovating, right? You are in the innovation business. And I think this new front office is going to change that. So perhaps there's going to be new things. Perhaps there are certain secrets that they may not want to give out just yet. But Charlie Blackmon had a nice spin ball machine, as they call it, to really try to ratchet things up to get a better feel of what it's going to be like when you play at sea level in Miami, so that those extremes don't feel as extreme. You're not seeing that breaking ball, you know, drop off the table entirely, because you don't see that at Coors Field in the same way. So you need to be able to get more repetitions because the Rockies don't. Rockies don't get to play a sea level game 81 times a year because they're at altitude. So they're only playing half the amount of games that the other teams are playing. The other teams are essentially all at sea level. Even Atlanta, who's 1,000 feet over sea level, it doesn't have the same impact. Arizona doesn't have the same impact. So the Rockies are at a disadvantage in that way. That's one of the reasons why the home road splits, I think, are going to always exist, but it doesn't maybe have to be as extreme. And I think maybe the pitching staff can learn something from that as well. They can have also closer home road splits when pitching at Coors Field. But as I was saying before about, the improvements to and the refresh to this roster, I mean, the 3 experienced starting pitchers is a huge one. And that just makes everybody that much better on this roster. Colorado had a lot of young pitchers start games last year. One of their goals this offseason was to increase the experience level of the rotation. You had Kyle Freeland, who he'll be 33 in May, and Ryan Feltner, who's 29, but still hasn't really established himself. Last year was supposed to be that year, but he had his own injuries. So that didn't really happen. After Antonio Senzatela, who's banished to the bullpen, you had a series of young pitchers or rookies or guys that just didn't have a lot of big league experience, despite maybe being in their mid to late 20s. Chase Dollander started a game. There were 7 rookies who started a game last year. Chase Dollander, Tanner Gordon, Bradley Blaylock, Carson Palmquist, McCade Brown, Ryan Rolston for 1 game. And you know what? Go ahead and throw in Anthony Molina there, who wasn't a rookie, but was a rookie starting pitcher. You don't have Herman Marquez. You don't have Austin Gomber. So now the rotation, maybe if you're looking at the most veteran starting pitchers, your starting rotation, we'll start with this. I'm not really saying this is who I think should be in the rotation, who I want in the rotation, but you have Kyle Freeland as your opening day starter. That would be his 4th. I think that would set a Rockies franchise record, breaking the one currently owned by Freeland and Marquez that they share. Michael Lorenzen, your number 2. Jose Quintana, your number 3. That breaks up your 2 lefties. Tomoyuki Sugano, and then Antonio Senzatela. So that means you've got no Chase Dollander, no Ryan Feltner, who does have options still, no Tanner Gordon, no Gabriel Hughes, at least not yet. Senzatela, ride him for as long as you want. If that's 3 starts, fine. And then that's the first guy up. But as soon as you ride Senzatela and he's done, he's gone. And now your depth is not 9 deep, like I just stated. The 5 in the rotation and those 4 younger players who have options. And it's noticeable how much the depth has improved. The quality, the upside, we're not talking about 2 number 1 starters or 3 number 2 starters. It's just a better depth. And the baseball world is taking notice. Sam Blum in The Athletic, who, wrote an article about the Rockies. You don't get a ton of those from The Athletic anymore, unfortunately, since they decided to cast Nick Groke aside, which is something that I think Rockies fans miss dearly. I know I do. Even besides just the great conversations I had with Nick in the press box, just his writing was outstanding. He did it for so long for the Denver Post that it was only logical that he would have been a perfect fit for The Athletic. But Sam Blum, had some nice things to say about, the Rockies' depth. And he caught up with Michael Lorenzen and had some interesting things to talk about. Like, are you crazy? Lorenzen's agent apparently said, you're insane. Why would you want to do something like that? Go to Colorado. But Ken Rosenthal, in his latest notebook, started off by saying, what is this we hear? Signs of life for the Colorado Rockies? Yeah, there are signs of life. There are good things happening. Ryan Feltner was working out like a caveman. Great article by Patrick Saunders over on the Denver Post. to help with his back and his shoulder injuries that he had last year. Alon Leishman believes that Ryan Feltner has what it takes to be an all-star in this league. I think that's still there. I didn't see that in Ryan Feltner when he first came up from the minors. I want to say in 2021, he actually made the jump from AA Hartford to the majors, skipped right over AAA at that point. But after everything you saw in 2024, and there were glimpses there even in 2023, you say, there is something there. There could be something there. And so this offseason for Feltner, the restart, I think can be huge. Let's not forget in 2024, he finished the season with an ERA under 3 in his last 15 starts, something that we hadn't seen from a Rockies starting pitcher since Germán Marquez's first half in 2021 when he was an all-star. So Ryan Feltner can be an all-star in this league, Alon Leishman, and I think all Rockies fans should have that same belief that, yeah, it's very possible. So he worked on his body, something that, Austin Gomber had been doing the last couple of years. Unfortunately, it fell apart for him in 2025, but in 2024, you saw a lot more success, did have those 30 starts, most in his career. But Feltner talking about being a long-time big leaguer. There are stages and steps to being a big leaguer. And Feltner's at a point in which he wants to last for a while, and he wants to last throughout the marathon because it's a grind. What happens to your body after so many starts? When this gets tight, this other component gets out of whack. He worked on trying to figure those things out this offseason, and that's been, and I think it will be beneficial for him. I've talked about the young players having to really bang on the door to get their opportunity, something that, perhaps maybe they were given those opportunities when they didn't deserve them in the past. Certainly, there are a lot of Rockies fans who wanted to see the prospects and had to wait longer than they felt. But I think we saw that those young players were not ready for the majors yet. This Ryan Feltner situation and Antonio Senzatela potentially as the number 5 starter, not the same, because Ryan Feltner has already shown that he is a big leaguer. So if he shows that he is ready to go out and take the ball every 5 days, he is going to have a spot in this rotation. I think he is much more likely. You have the exact same spring training for Chase Dollander and Ryan Feltner. I tend to think Ryan Feltner is going to get that opportunity before Chase Dollander does. Dollander is going to be the first one up when somebody goes down, no doubt about it. But I think Feltner may have that edge just a little bit. Anthony saying, fun fact, only 2 pitchers to ever hit a home run in 3 consecutive at-bats is former Rocky Mike Hampton and newly acquired Rocky Michael Lorenzen. Yes, I love that. Tomoyuki Sugano also, these are some of the weird things that I'll post on social media. Sugano wearing the number 11. Mike Hampton wore number 10. And there's also Alex White. Don't forget Alex White. I think it was 2012, wore the number 6. The only starting pitcher to wear a single digit. The other 2 pitchers who wore single digit, 0, Adam Ottavino and Jaden Hill currently. So I like dumb stuff like that. But this rotation is really good. And I think I'll give credit where credit is due. And I'll also give her a shout out. Renee Deckard. She said this offseason that the Rockies were going to have a seriously different look to them in 2026. And I think we really have to define what that means. Like the roster is going to look a lot different. And I think we might be on the cusp, if not just over the edge that, okay, it does look a lot different. Is it 7 players? I would have guessed 6 players at minimum are going to be different on the opening day roster. But right now we're looking at 11 different members of the 40-man roster who have joined the team from outside the organization. It's a lot more than what I had thought. Brennan Bernardino, he's going to make the roster so long as he's healthy out of the bullpen. Willie Castro with that 2-year deal. Troy Johnston battling out for a spot at first base. We'll see if he sticks around. Edward Julian, who I think has a firm spot cinched up for himself. There's Michael Lorenzen. Jake McCarthy has a spot in the outfield. That's 6. Pearson Ole, who I think might start the year down in AAA. RJ Pettit, Rule 5 draft pick from Detroit. He's got to make the team. If not, he's going to go back to Detroit more likely than not. Jose Quintana, that's number 7. Tomoyuki Sugano, number 8. And Keegan Thompson, righty reliever claimed off of waivers from the Reds. Remains to be seen if he is going to make that roster. So 8 guys right there, I think, are pretty much locks to be on the opening day roster. So I think that's what you probably would have expected. So I wouldn't say it's radically different, but it is going to be different. 60 active players right now in the big league side of camp. So 20 non-roster invites. 26 of the 60 players in camp have appeared for the Rockies in the past few years. Actually, 26 of the 60 were on the 2025 roster. 30 were originally drafted or signed by Colorado. And you have 13 of the top 30 prospects in camp, which is solid. And when I say 13 of the Rockies' top 30 prospects in camp, that doesn't include players who are no longer rookies. Kyle Karros is not a rookie. He had too many plate appearances. Ryan Ritter is not a rookie. Chase Dollander, Juan Mejia, Braxton Fulford, Troy Johnston, Ariel Amador, McCade Brown, Pearson Ole, Jaden Hill, Luis Peralta, all of those young guys who still feels like they're a rookie. I mean, I think we all can remember in 2024, maybe even parts of 2025, Bud Black almost saying, Michael Toley is kind of like a rookie, even though, he did not have rookie eligibility anymore. All those guys are no longer rookies. Blake Krim, who's the oldest of that whole group, still has rookie eligibility, but he's not a top 30 prospect, oddly enough. So the projections that I alluded to earlier are interesting. Baseball Prospectus has them, I think they still have them at 61 and 101. Not bad, because I think a month ago, before some of these recent moves, like Willie Castro, like Sagano, and Quintana for the rotation, they might have been closer to 110. So a nice 9-10 win turnaround. Fangraphs, which had them at 65 wins the other day, now is showing 66 and 96. Whoa. Now, besides only, quote unquote, losing 96 games this year potentially, what losing 96 games more than likely means is that there's not going to be a ton of conversation throughout the year about this being this 100 loss team. Yeah, maybe they'll get there, but it's not like it was last year when by the time you reached late April, it felt like this season was over. Like, what is the point? You got to still play those games, but it was like, it's done. A lot of years covering this Rockies team, this organization, you get to the trade deadline and it feels like, okay, Rockies didn't add. They shouldn't have. They're too far back of the final wild card spot. And you go, it's over. It was over in April. It was bad. I don't think that's going to happen quite as much, despite an incredibly difficult schedule the first month of the season. They're playing almost exclusively teams that made to the postseason last year, and a couple that may not have, but were still really damn good. That's going to be their challenge, but I think they can come out of April feeling good about what they were able to do, despite a win-loss record that might not be fair. Look, when you're the worst team in the league, everyone's going to look a lot better than you. But I think once we hit June and it gets a lot warmer and you're thinking about the summer, kids are out of school by that point, you're going to feel pretty decent about this Rockies team. And as Anthony mentioned earlier, they're going to be a little bit more exciting. You're going to be more excited about them, and you won't have to fake it. Not losing eight games in a row over the course of a week and a half is going to do a lot to help things out. It's going to do a lot. So appreciate everybody dropping by. Let me check the chat one more time. There's a Yankees fan in the chat over on YouTube. Can we allow that? No, it's all right. All fan bases are welcome, especially because half the Yankees roster right now is former Rockies, right? Between Chivy G, Jake Bird, Ryan McMahon. I think coming over to figure out a couple things about the Rockies, and that's quite all right. At Patrick D. Lyons on X, at Patrick D. Lyons, MLB on TikTok and Blue Sky, and the Rockies Insider channel over on YouTube. Appreciate everybody dropping by. You've given me some wonderful momentum, but unfortunately, as you know, momentum, it's only as good as my next show. So of course, I'll talk to you then. Thank you guys.